Hey, welcome back. This video is where we get to begin installing Exchange Server 2016. Now, I'm going to do something really unorthodox in this video. You see, Exchange is one of Microsoft's more complicated products, and there's a lot of room for things to go wrong, both with the installation and with the operation. So, that being the case, with this video series, one of the things that I'm trying to do isn't just show you how to get everything perfect the first time, but also how to diagnose error messages that you might receive. So that being said, my plan for this video is to show you two separate mailbox server installations. The first installation is going to be on a server that hasn't been adequately prepared. Almost nothing has been done to get the server ready for Exchange. So we're going to get a ton of error messages, and I'm going to show you what most of these error messages mean and how to work through those errors. Then, once we get past that point, I'm going to show you how to install Exchange on a server that has been adequately prepared, just so that you can see the process as a whole and see what a smooth installation should look like. So we've got a lot of work to do in this video, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first big question I'm sure you're wondering is, what have and haven't I done to this server? Well, I haven't done hardly anything. The server has internet connectivity, and it's pointing to an Active Directory DNS server, but that's really about it. If I right-click on the Start button and go to System, you can see that right now the server is a member of a work group. So I've assigned a computer name of EXCH1 because this will eventually be an Exchange Mailbox server, but I haven't even gone so far as to join an Active Directory domain. As I said before, I do have an internet connectivity. If I go to Control Panel and Network and Internet, Network and Sharing Center, change adapter settings, and go to Properties, you can see that I have assigned this server to use an Active Directory DNS server. The only other thing that I've done on this server to prepare it is that I've copied the Exchange installation files to the server. So if I go into C, I've got a folder called Exchange Files, and this contains the files that are going to be used to install Exchange. So I haven't done anything fancy here. This is more or less just for convenience so that I don't have to use a DVD each time. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to double click on Setup, and the first screen that we see asks us if we want to check for updates. Now, normally in a production environment, you would, of course, check for updates. But I checked for updates a few minutes ago before I began recording, and there aren't any, so I'm not going to worry about an update check. I don't really want to waste your time with that. Running an update check just for it to say that there are no updates. I'm going to choose the Don't Check for Updates Right Now option and click Next. And now there is a file copy process that has to occur. This doesn't usually take all that long, but I am going to pause the video for a second while this finishes. Okay, so now we arrive at the Welcome to Microsoft Exchange Server 2016 screen. There isn't really anything that we have to do here, so I'm just going to click Next. And of course, we have to accept the license agreement. I'll click Next again. And we have a choice of either using the recommended settings or not using the recommended settings. Now, if we choose to go with the recommended settings, you can see that Exchange Server will automatically check online for solutions when encountering errors and provide usage feedback to Microsoft to help improve Exchange future versions. Now, being that this is a lab environment, I think I would probably be doing Microsoft a disservice if I sent usage data to them. So I'm going to go with do not use recommended settings. In your own environment, it's up to you which option you choose. Exchange is going to function in exactly the same way regardless of which option you go with. So I'm going to click Next. And now we have to pick the server roles that we want to install. I'm going to make this a mailbox server. So I'm going to choose the mailbox role, and the management tools are selected automatically when I do that. Now check this out. We have a checkbox down here to automatically install Windows Server roles and features that are required to install Exchange Server. So we definitely want to choose this, because what this is going to do is this is going to cause setup to install any missing prerequisites as a part of the Exchange Server deployment process. Now, I mentioned earlier that with the first Exchange Server installation that I'm going to be working through, we're going to receive a lot of errors. And this holds true even with me selecting this checkbox. But you'll see what this looks like a little bit later on. For right now, I'm going to click Next. And now we have to select the installation path. I'm just going to go with the defaults and click Next. And then we have to specify a name for the Exchange Server organization. Now, in the previous video, when we prepared the Active Directory, we had to provide a name for the organization, and I went with the name Posey. So I'm going to enter that same name right here, and I'm going to click Next, and it asks if I want to disable malware scanning. I certainly don't. Typically, that's not something you would want to do. So I'm going to click next again. And now we get into the prerequisite check. So this takes a little while because this is also the part of the process where some of the prerequisites get installed. So I'm going to pause the video. We'll pick it up here in a little bit, and we'll take a look at the list of errors that were produced by the prerequisite check. Okay, so the prerequisite check is completed, and we're left with a lot of errors. So let's take a look at what some of those errors are. The very first one, the computer isn't part of an Active Directory domain. Okay, well, we knew that going in, but that's a good indication that we have a problem with Active Directory. Then we have the user isn't logged on to an Active Directory domain. Now, obviously, we got this error because the computer isn't joined to an Active Directory. But you can also get this error if you are joined to an Active Directory, but you happen to log in using a local user account rather than a domain account. Then we've got the computer doesn't belong to a valid Active Directory site. There's a pending reboot from a previous installation of a Windows Server role or feature. Well, remember, we just installed a lot of prerequisite components, so those components do require a reboot, so that's why we're getting that error. So let's see what else we've got. You must be a member of the Organization Management Role Group or a member of the Enterprise Admins Group. Again, Active Directory. You must use an account that's a member of the Organization Management Role Group to install or upgrade the first mailbox server role in the topology. So again, an Active Directory related error. There's another instance of needing to belong to the Organization Management Role Group. And here's yet another one. Let's scroll down and see if we can find anything a bit more unique. Looks like these errors are all basically about the same. Then we've got setup encountered a problem while validating the state of the Active Directory. Active Directory server is not available. Well, we knew that. Then here's something a little bit different. The IIS-7 dynamic content compression component is required. Install the component via Server Manager. Well, this one's kind of interesting because remember, we told Exchange Setup to install all of the prerequisite components, and yet here's an error message telling us that some IIS-7 components aren't installed. So why is that? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and open up Server Manager. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Manage and then Add Roles and Features. And I'm just going to quickly move through the wizard to get to the screen that allows us to install roles. And you'll notice that we have an error right here saying that the destination server has a pending restart. So that's an indication right there that we need to reboot the server in order to finish the role installation process. Now, if I scroll down, here's web server. Remember, this wasn't installed earlier. This is something that Exchange installed for us. And if I expand that out, you can begin to see that there are a lot of different web server components that are installed. And the reason why these aren't being recognized is because the pending reboot that is required. So once we reboot the server, then we should start seeing Exchange recognize that those components are installed. So let me go ahead and close out Server Manager, and let's take a look and see if there's anything else worth pointing out here. So we got more IIS related problems, and I'll scroll down some more. And then client certificate mapping authentication component is required, and install the component via Server Manager. And then we have an HTTP redirection error. The tracing component's required. The request monitor component is required. So we've got all of these errors that are popping up, and most of them are related to either not being a member of the Active Directory or they're related to the fact that we have to reboot the server. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And let's go ahead and join an Active Directory domain. So I'm going to right-click, go to System, and I'm going to click on Change Settings, and I'm going to click Change, and then I'm going to join the domain Posey Demo. And it looks like our domain join was successful, so I'm going to click OK, and OK, close, and I'm going to reboot the server, and then we'll pick it up here in just a few minutes, and we'll try running Exchange Server Setup again and see what happens. Okay, my server has rebooted, so let's go ahead and try to install Exchange. I'm going to do exactly what I did earlier. I'm going to open up File Explorer, and I'm going to go to the Exchange Files folder, and scroll down and run Setup. And once again, I'm not going to check for updates because I know I've already got the latest updates. And we have to wait for files to copy. Okay, so the setup wizard has opened, and I'm just going to breeze through this using exactly the same options as we chose last time. I'm going to click next on the introduction screen. I'll accept the license agreement and click Next. I'm not going to worry about using the recommended settings. Click Next. And I'm going to install the mailbox role. And once again, we will choose the option to automatically install Windows Server roles and features that are required to install Exchange. I'll click Next. I'm going to accept the default path. I'm not going to disable malware scanning. And now we launch into the prerequisite check. Okay, so the prerequisite check has completed, and now we have one error instead of a bunch. And we have an error that says that the computer requires the Microsoft Unified Communications Managed API 4.0 Core Runtime 64-bit. And then it says that you need to install the software and provides a link. So why did we get this error? Well, as you'll recall, there was an option to install all of the prerequisite components. But for whatever reason, when you install those prerequisite components, Exchange Server Setup doesn't install this component automatically. This is something that you're going to have to download and install yourself. Now, there's nothing especially difficult about it. It's just a standard download. We have a download link right here, but it does have to be done manually, at least for right now. Microsoft may choose to change that down the road. But I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to download and install this component, and then we'll retry this and see what happens. Okay, so I'm back, and you can see that installation of the Microsoft Unified Communications Managed API 4.0 is complete. And in case you're wondering, this only took about 5 minutes, probably not even that long. But I'm going to click Finish to close that out, and I'm going to close the download window. And I got this by just clicking on this link right here. That took me straight to the download site where I was able to click on another link, launch the download, run the installer. It couldn't be easier. So I'm going to close that out. And I'm going to retry the readiness check. And this takes just a minute, so I'm going to pause the video for a second. Okay, and this time the prerequisite check passed. We don't have any more errors. Now, pay very, very close attention to this screen. You'll notice that we have the prerequisite analysis, we have no errors, and we haven't actually installed Exchange Server yet. We have an install button that we're going to have to use to do that. Now, the reason why I say to pay attention to this particular screen isn't because there's anything special that we have to do right now, but at the very beginning of this video, I mentioned that we're going to install Exchange on a second server, and that we're going to do that based on an installation type that's a lot cleaner. So I actually developed a procedure for installing Exchange on that server that is based on what you see right here. So I'm going to be referring back to this screen, so that's why I'm saying take a good look at it. So with that said, I'm just going to go ahead and click Install. And you can see that the installation process involves 14 different steps. So this is going to take quite some time to complete. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to let setup do its thing, and we'll pick it up here when setup finishes. Okay, so it looks like the setup process has completed, and we have a message saying that setup has finished successfully and that to complete the installation, you're going to need to reboot the server. So now that we've worked through this installation, what I want to do is switch to a different server, and I want to walk you through a much cleaner Exchange 2016 installation. Okay, so here I am on another Exchange server, and if I right-click on the Start button and go to System, you can see that this server is called EXCH2, whereas the previous one was EXCH1, and it is domain joined. So with that said, let's go ahead and deploy Exchange. So I'm going to open up File Manager, and I'll go to C, and here's my Exchange Files folder. Again, this is something I created off the installation media, and I'm going to run Setup, and I'm going to go through this exactly the same way that I did on the previous server. So I'm not going to worry about checking for updates because I've already got the latest updates. I'll click Next. There's a file copy process that has to occur, and the file copy process has completed and Setup is initializing. And now we're taken into the Exchange 2016 Setup Wizard. So once again, nothing to do on the introduction screen, so I'm going to click Next. I'll accept the license agreement, click Next. I'm not going to bother with the recommended settings because we're in a lab environment. I'll just click Next. I'm going to install the mailbox role just like what we did before and click Next. I'll go with the default installation path and click Next. I'm not going to disable malware scanning. And now we get into the readiness check. And after a brief readiness check, we get one warning. And the warning message is that Setup can't detect a send connector with an address space of blank. and it says that Mailflow to the internet may not work properly. Well, that's fine because we haven't created a send connector yet. But the point that I wanted to show you was that we got to the screen a whole lot more quickly than we did with the other server, and we don't have any errors. We've got this one warning, but no errors. So what happened? Why was this so much easier? Well, the reason is that I prepared the server ahead of time. Obviously, the server was domain joined before I attempted to install Exchange, and that was a big part of it. But there's a little more to it than that. If you think back a few minutes, you'll recall that I showed you a screen very similar to this one, and I said to pay attention to it, that I was going to talk about it again later on. Well, you'll notice that right here, we have the option to install Exchange, but at this point, Exchange isn't installed just yet. So what I did was, because I have a number of different Exchange servers that I'm going to have to set up in the creation of this video series, I went ahead and I used System Center Virtual Machine Manager to create a virtual machine template. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with Virtual Machine Manager, it's essentially a tool that is basically a management component for Microsoft Hyper-V. And what this tool allows you to do is to create virtual machine templates. So in other words, you can set up a virtual machine, configure that virtual machine any way that you like, and then when you're done, you can turn that virtual machine into a template so that you can make clones of it. And that's exactly what I did. So when I created the template for Exchange Server, what I did was I set up Windows and I configured Virtual Machine Manager to join that Windows machine to a domain upon installation. But then I copied the Exchange Server setup files to the machine. You'll notice that they were already there. If I open File Manager, you can see Exchange files. That's something that I put there ahead of time. It's part of the template. But I also worked partially through the Exchange Server setup process, all the way to this point right here. And what that did is that allowed me to install all of the prerequisite components ahead of time before I ever created the template. You'll notice that we didn't even get the error message saying that we needed to install that one particular Unified Communications Runtime component. That's because that component was installed ahead of time before I ever created the template. So by creating a template like that, it makes it very, very easy to deploy as many Exchange servers as I want without having to work through a long, tedious prerequisite installation process. So because this is ready to go, I can just click install and the Exchange Server deployment process begins. So we still have 14 steps of installation that we have to work through, but this is completely automated. There's nothing I have to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause the video, let this finish, and we'll pick it up once the setup process finishes. And it looks like setup is completed successfully. Once again, we received the message saying that we need to reboot the server to finish the installation. So that's going to do it for this video. And in the next video, I'm going to come back and show you how to deploy an Edge server.